for what?
Time for what?
Experience in college.
Time for reinforcement.
Time for liftoff!
Welcome to College for All, where nothing is impossible unless you think it is impossible.
College.
My college scholarship.
Yes. Boom.
College ran by real fast.
You hung in with the best college.
Touchdown!
First time for everything.
Well, what are you waiting for?
What are you waiting for?
Let's do this thing.
Genius, let's do this thing!
So we're here today with Michael Arlen Davis. Did I get the name right?
You did?
Yes. No, it's right here. Yes,
Okay.
yes. So,
Okay.
and we're here at NACAC 2018 at Salt Lake City. And here we have thousands of high schools, colleges, and with Michael Arlen Davis, who is the director and the producer for The Test and the Art of Thinking. Welcome.
Thanks very much.
Yes. So tell me, what inspired you to create a film regarding about the testing world?
We did this film, my wife and I, as parents. We actually knew nothing more than the average parent, I would say. I would call ourselves average parents, not particularly informed on this subject. We had two girls, and we watched our older daughter go through the process, and I would say we were not particularly helpful. We kind of observed from a distance. I don't think she really wanted our help, but the test struck us, the experience, our older daughter, struck us a little odd. It almost seemed like she was having to have an alternative education to take the test, that what was going on in school was not adequate, that she had to have test prep, she had to take the test several times, she had to have different types of test prep, and whereas she was a very diligent student in school and enjoyed school very much, and school seemed to have a logical flow and order to it, the test did not for her. And so we just something we observed. And then when our younger daughter, 5 years later, came along, we decided we were going to get much more involved and attempt to prepare her ourselves. And I started, at that point, really researching the tests and the history. And we just thought that we were gathering information that might be useful to other parents, or information that we didn't have when our first daughter went through the process. We just started doing a lot of research. We read the literature. There's a fair amount of literature about the history. It's dense. It's technical, somewhat technical. But we just thought we would start the process. We just started doing interviews.
Yeah, and now you're from the Bay Area, correct?
Yes.
So you understand the frenzy that's going on regarding about testing. So when you were doing the film, right, because you were asking different researchers from the college end, from the high school end, and students, have you noticed any differences across the nation regarding about, when students are dealing with the SAT or ACT exam?
I'm not sure that I could speak to that question really directly. We tried to create an outline of the whole subject matter, and we talk about the history. It started with the SAT in 1926. We provide information about the history and its genesis, and we spoke to, I would say, probably the most significant experts, people who've been studying this subject for decades, the professionals who make their career. So we were looking to create what I would call an overarching story to provide context. We were looking to create a film that we would find useful and informative if we were starting the process as parents. So our goal was to find context in a general sense. And then we were looking for emblematic student experiences. We were trying to capture student experiences. We spoke to a lot of students, and we're trying to capture a range of student experiences, the ones that we felt were most common. For example, there's a young woman in the film whose name is Kayla, who talks very dramatically about, I've been an excellent student throughout my career since 7th grade, but I can't do well on this test, and I've done test prep, and I've done everything that's been asked from me, and my score goes down. So how is it possible that my score can go down when I take the test again? So that we think that character in the film, that individual, I think speaks to a lot of the experience, frustration that a number of students have. Some, and then also in the film, are students who test very well. There's a young man in the film who says, "I like the SAT. This speaks to me. This is it's the way I work. It's the way my mind works." And so we think we captured, I think, a fairly broad array of the experience, so most people will be able to identify with the conversation.
Right, and you've also uncovered a lot of biases through the years that the test has produced for certain groups as well, too.
Well, we didn't, I will say, it's a subject that's been a matter of a lot of conversation, and there's a lot that's been written about that. We don't emphasize that in the film. We made a decision that wasn't a subject in particular we were going to emphasize. We received a little criticism from the New York Times, in the New York Times review of the film, where they point out that the Times had wished that we had delved deeper into that. But our view was that others have, and that subject is out in the public, and we didn't think we were adding anything new or interesting by rehashing that particular information.
Right. And I think one thing that was really interesting is that you also interviewed somebody who did test prep through Think Tank in your movie.
Yes.
Yes, and who spent hours and hours. And Think Tank was actually had an article about them in the U.S. Today where they were even promising certain families $1 million if you have to charge them $1 million and guarantee get into Ivies. And they asked, well, how's that coming? It's like, well, it's becoming very successful. But now these same families are hiring us to coach their kids how to be successful for getting jobs or careers.
That's new to me. I
Yeah,
haven't heard that one.
yeah. And so when you've been following some of the kids and hearing their stories of, like you said, like even with your own child, of doing a sub-school, right? There's so many test preps. Even here, at NACAC, there's so many booths of test prep here. Where do you see it going, from your observation, and now with this new movement of test optional that's happening?
That's... I can't say. That's really hard to say. I think it's like a lot of things. I think it bifurcates, it splits, and some people would say, for example, the organic agriculture movement in the United States is post-World War II. And there are a lot of that. It emerged basically in post-World War II period, and certainly didn't really come into its own until probably the 90s, 2000s. And now you can go into almost any grocery store in the world, maybe not in the world, but in the developed world, and find organic products, as an example. A lot of people would say that the organic movement is a response to industrialized agriculture, as an example. So you have a response. So now you have test optional as a response to the testing regime.
Right.
So you have a regime of a kind that becomes almost monopolistic, and then you have a response to it, and that's it appears to be what's happening, to some extent. I think there'll be a multifarious path forward. I think there'll be a lot of different options, would be my guess, as there probably are now. If you do well on tests, if you're acclimated to that kind of testing, you're going to like it. You're going to want it. It helps you. If you're not, you're going to look for a path that doesn't require it. So I don't anticipate there's going to be one, any particular path forward. Testing, it's kind of an interesting, for us in making the film, the question was, what are these tests in particular testing? That was really our question. Mm-hmm. It wasn't a question about tests in general or the idea of tests. It was, what are these tests testing? That was really what was unclear, because when I started to help my second daughter, mm-hmm. I started taking the SAT myself. I took practice tests.
Oh, you were really involved as a parent. Yeah, hands-on, yeah.
So, to be honest, for me, it felt borderline dishonest. And so I'm saying to myself, can I ask you to invest yourself to really work hard for this? When what they're asking for is really, it's not really clear to me that it's honest. And frankly, I couldn't. I kind of said, you're on your own. I told my daughter, I can't prepare you for this because it doesn't feel right to me, the feeling of it. In fact, when we were doing interviews, we would ask people, what does the test feel like to you? In other words, not cognitively what's your experience, but what does it feel like? So our work and our effort is not about tests in general. It's about these tests and what they're asking of students in particular. And so that was our curiosity, and then we got into the history of them. They started out strictly as so-called IQ tests. They came out of the IQ movement, which was new in the 1920s. IQ emerges in the U.S. in the early part of the 20th century. People who were in the IQ movement developed the tests in 1926, as pointed out in the film. IQ was this new discovery. This was going to be this new magic by which we were going to determine the capacity of individuals.
Right.
And I think what's really interesting, and I think we try to do it carefully in the film, is there is still in the world, I think, this sense that there is this thing called IQ, and it tells yourself how smart you are. And I think there are people in the film who question that. And I think that's really valuable, because we still, generally speaking, accept the idea that an IQ test measures your intelligence and that's it. You're stuck there, whatever that number is.
Yeah.
And that's where the SAT emerged from. And there are many people who say, young people and families still interpret it that way, that it's a measure of intelligence. And it's not clear to me how healthy that is. And so if our research shares some of the questions about that whole notion from people who have been studying this for decades, I think that's a valuable service.
Right. And so if you had to do this all over again with your eldest daughter, knowing everything that you know,